Good morning, Madison Hills. Feeling good? Enjoying the summer? Is it summer yet? Not officially. Yeah, well, enjoying it. Who's out of school? See all the teachers raising their hands. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, gotcha. Well, I have another poll for you. So take a look at this car. Look at it for a second. Just out of curiosity, if you like this style of car, raise your hand. Are you kidding me? 4 of us? 4? Really? I love this car. It's called a Dodge Magnum. And I had one, it was 15 years ago or so. I had one. It's my favorite car that I've ever had. I feel like it's got this mixture of because I'm a family guy. It's got that station wagon vibe. But then on the bad boy side, it's got that mafia kind of look. So it's like a mafia wagon or something. And I kid you not, my license plate actually said 049 MAF. And I'm like, that's right, mafia. That's right, family. So I love this car. It's one of my favorites. Huge interior, just loved everything about it. I have another pic that I couldn't put it up there. It had something wrong with it. We took it to multiple mechanics. They could not identify the problem. So we thought, since it was pertaining to the gas pedal and the brake pedal, that we should just go ahead and get rid of it. So we tell the car lot we're going to trade it in, tell them all the info. They're like, hey, we got it. We'll take care of it. If you bought a Dodge Magnum and it was a problem 10, 15 years ago, I'm sorry about that. We told the car lot everything that was going on. Bought our car, we disclosed all the information, but traded in, and I have this pic. Bella wasn't here yet, and she likes when I say she was still just a twinkle in Daddy's eye. So she wasn't here yet, and Christian and Sophie, they're small, and they're leaned up against the Dodge Magnum. They were trading it in on a new vehicle, and they're so sad. This picture, I love this car too. I love the vast majority of you all. They love this car. We had so many memories, and we're talking about the memories of it, and the drive home in the new car wasn't even exciting. They were wrecked. It was like I just pulled their childhood out from and under them, and it was a sad moment. And I look at that picture, and I'm like, decisions are hard and complicated and not easy. Big decisions, or even if they're small decisions. You think about relational requirements, part of your marriage, in your family, church, with ministry. You think of starting your career and when you're going to start it and when you're going to end it. Or if you're the owner of people's careers, your business, how you're going to hire and fire. Decisions are complex and they're complicated, which is why we need a shot of wisdom. Sometimes we need a shot of wisdom in any given moment. And I'm convinced that decisions are difficult because they're emotional. Not only are they emotional, they're emotional, include or they affect other people. Now the mic sounds good from up here. Does it sound good out there? Can you hear me? Sound awful? Sound awful? Time out. Okay. What do you want me to do? Go this way? Get the piano mic. Oh, all right. The dreaded handheld. All right. Let me cut this bad boy off. All right, replay. Start from the beginning. Okay, do you like this car? All right. So here we go. We're good. Okay, now you can hear me good? Sound good? All right. So I'm convinced that, let me try to recreate the mood that we had going on, that decisions are difficult because they're emotional, and they're emotional because they involve other people. So when you lock eyes with someone and you know you got a difficult decision to make and you know it's going to affect them, what do? You shy away from it. Now, I don't think this verse is explicitly literal, but I think there's a nugget of truth in there. And you know what we've been doing? We've been walking through the book of Proverbs, and we're looking at these small nuggets of wisdom, these shots of wisdom. And then we're bouncing around in the Old and New Testament to see stories that capture this understanding, to see stories that capture this verse. Now, that's not my problem, right? We're good? Okay, all right. Seeing stories that capture these verses. And Proverbs 14:12 says, there is a way that appears right to a man. Like in the moment, it sounds right. Proverbs 14:12, it feels right. The logic adds up.
It makes sense. But in the end, it leads to death. Now, I'm not convinced that that's always a loss of life. But what I am convinced of is that there is always a loss. So that's why we need wisdom. Sometimes in the moment, there's a way that it just seems right. But as time goes on and over time, you get a better feel for the people involved, you get a better feel for the dynamic, and you realize, wait a minute, if I'm not careful here, someone is going to lose, and not in a good or healthy way. So we've got a story that captures this proverb, and it comes from 1 Kings. And if you're very perceptive, you'll notice we're doing 4 sermons in this study. And the first is going to be the presence of wisdom. And then the second, last week and this week, is the absence of wisdom. And then the last one, we'll come back and bookend it with a story about the presence of wisdom. But this comes from 1 Kings chapter 12. And we got a little battle going on. You can read about this in your study Bible later on. But the context is simply, there's 2 guys, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And you've got a power struggle that's actually occurring. And Rehoboam is about to step into this kingship. And the Israelite nation has split into 2. You've got Israel up top and Judah down below. And there's tension between the 2 forces, the 2 dynamics. And there's some big decisions that have to be made about taxes and how we get along and how multiple leaders lead these conflicting kingdoms. So we step into the story in 1 Kings 12 with Rehoboam having to make a big decision. So some people come to him and they're like, hey, we want you to get this right. Here's what we're looking for. Or to Bob's point, here's the job description. Here's some of the details involved. What do you think? And right off the bat, this is such a great leadership lesson for every single one of us. Right off the bat, Rehoboam gets it right. He looks at these people and in verse 5, he says, okay, time out. Go away for 3 days. Go away for 3 days and then come back to me. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that is extremely valuable insight. You've got a big decision. You've got to make a move, and you're a little on the fence about which direction to go. One of the best things you can do is call a time out, a personal time out. Say, give me a little space. Let me think through this. Let me get clear in my own mind. Then we'll come back to the context, we'll come back to the question, we'll come back to the consideration, and then we'll make a decision. Rehoboam gets this right off the bat. So just as a little reflective exercise for us, I thought I could list 3 questions because I bet in a room this size, we have some people who have to make some decisions. And maybe it's not trading in your car, but it's related to something a little bit more significant. And it is emotional. And it's emotional because it's going to affect and involve some other people. So when you're making a decision, first question, have you considered the potential outcomes of your decision? When you're weighing this move, have you thought about the ways that this could potentially play out and prepared yourself for those outcomes? Have I experienced any pressure from others encouraging me to rush my decision? Oh, that seems so true in David Green's world. But are you feeling pressure to rush your decision? Well, Rehoboam gets something right off the bat. Time out. This is a big deal. I need to think through this. Or have I identified any misguided motivation that is causing or prompting me to make this move? That's where you get really honest with yourself. And you have a decision, and sometimes it's emotional and you know it's going to affect other people, but it's emotional not in a way to where you're sympathetic or empathetic with someone. Sometimes you want to make the move because it's how it's going to affect the other person, and sometimes you know as well as I do, if we're being honest, sometimes you know it's going to impact them negatively. So have I identified any misguided motions that's prompting me to make this move? Here's why what Rehoboam is doing is so important. You and I will say this, but you and I, it's a little inaccurate. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on our experiences. And that's exactly what Rehoboam is doing. He's in this situation. He's in this circumstance. This is what's happening. This is his reality, just like whatever's going on in your world is your reality. And he takes a time out. and he starts thinking through. And not only does he think through, he does something else that he initially gets right, and then it just goes south because he works wisdom out of the equation. But here's what I want you to hang on to. When you've got a decision to make and you're reflecting on it, taking time out for some of us, and I bet if we polled, I bet the hands would go up a lot more than they did with the picture of the Dodge Magnum. But you know as well as I do that sometimes you're in a situation and anxiety starts to pop up because you're taking a little time to make the decision. Well, if that's what you're doing, I want you to know that even if you've got the anxiety, don't quit. Do not quit. Don't throw your hands up. Don't throw in the towel and walk away. There's a much better option. And if you have a decision to make and you've got the anxiety swelling up, don't guess. Don't close your eyes. Don't cross your fingers and reach for some random solution. There's a much better option. And it's something that Rehoboam does, and he gets it right again. He gets the right people around the right table. That's just a leadership way of saying, make sure you have the right people speaking into your life when you have a significant decision to make. When it's becoming difficult or cloudy and you need some clarity, make sure you have the right people speaking into that right scenario. Sometimes you've got family and they're wise and you love them and they love you and they care about you, but they're not the right person to speak into this context. And sometimes you have friends and they value your friendship. It's decades deep, this friendship. But with this conversation, they're not the right ones to have a voice in this conversation. So you've got to get the right people around the right table when you're making a decision. So as we go on, one of my favorite quotes, and this is what Rehoboam, I think, is where he starts missing the mark. One of my favorite quotes says, leaders cannot be as anxious as the people they're leading. Time out for a second. I hope every single one of you, and I'm not trying to exaggerate or do one of those things that sounds good at the moment or blow smoke or anything, but 99.9% of us, we are a leader in some capacity. You may never stand on a stage, but you may stand before the people that you love and you share a home with. You're a parent. You're in your business. You lead a ministry here. You're involved in something outside in the community, and you're the point person. Every single one of us is a leader in some capacity, and everybody in your circle of influence wins when a leader gets better. You are a leader in some capacity. So you cannot be as anxious as the people you lead. And when I talk about anxiety in this context, I'm not talking about like a diagnosable disorder. Instead, I'm talking about those moments where anxiety starts to swell up and you have a decision to make and there's no way around it. You've got to go through it. And that anxiety that makes you make a decision that you shouldn't make, that kind of anxiety, you can't be as anxious as the people you're leading. You've heard me talk about this before, and we'll talk about it a lot more because it's so important. And not only is it important, it has implications. So you, in your sphere of leadership, who you are as a leader in your context, you have got to bring a non-anxious presence to the table. This is where I think Rehoboam drops the ball. So he's going to get some people around the table, and notice who he gets. So you go on in the First Kings story. So Rehoboam gets the people that he grew up with to come and sit around this table to help him make this decision. The people he grew up with. Now, time out for a second. Another time out. I want you to know that when you get people speaking into your life, the best criteria is not, do I like them? That is not the best criteria for people to speak life into your life. Do I like them? There's a much better criteria. So Rehoboam gets the people that he grew up with around the table and he says, hey, this is what's going on. What's your advice? And here's their advice. And it's a little more lengthy than we got on the screen. You can read it later. They come around, they're like, okay, listen, tell the people that you're going to be leading. Your dad, Solomon, he put a heavy yoke on you. I'm going to make it even heavier. Can you imagine? Can you imagine you saying something like that to the people that look up to you? Oh, you think you've had it rough? You just wait. Just wait till I clock in. It's gonna be really rough. Can you imagine? That's insane. Caveat. You know, we're led here at Madison Hills by a group of men we call elders. And over the past year, I've had the joy and the opportunity of sharing a room with them once a month and sitting around the table where we're talking about Madison Hills Christian Church. And I want you to know that as I listen to these conversations, and I'm involved in these conversations, and I add input into these conversations, and people respond to my input, I want you to know something about the leaders here at Madison Hills. They love you. It is amazing some of the statements that are made in these boardroom meetings. Our group of elders, they want to serve you. They have your best interest in mind. And it's really interesting to me that when they talk about Madison Hills Christian Church, they don't talk about the people who have been here the longest, even though they talk about those people. They talk about new people. They talk about people that we'll meet 4 or 5 years down the road. They talk about people that you don't hear their names a lot. They talk about this whole church, and I'm convinced that our elders here at Madison Hills Christian Church, they get the bigger picture, and I love it. And it's been one of the joys over the past year to serve alongside of them in a leadership perspective. I think they embody what Jesus and another New Testament author was trying to get across when it comes to being in charge, if you will. I typically use the NIV. It's just the most commonly used Bible, so it's easily accessible for all of us. I use the NIV. These next 2 verses come from the New Living Version, the NLV, because I think they capture what Jesus and Peter are trying to say. I think they capture it so well in modern language. But Jesus is talking about people in leadership positions, and he says, you know, kings love to show people their power. And important leaders, they push their power on people. But it should not be that way with you. Those of you who are following me, it shouldn't be that way. And some of your Bibles would end that and say, not so with you. In other words, you're in a position of power or authority, but you don't lead people from your position of power or authority. There's a different way of working with them. There's a different dynamic that should be at play. And I think Peter captures this. Peter writes in a time when the church was expanding. It was moving on from Jerusalem. And local churches and local areas were popping up, like a Madison Hills Christian Church. So there was the need for local leadership. So Peter is writing to these local leaders and he says, hey, you know, you're in leadership, but don't be bosses over the people you lead. Isn't that great language? Don't be bosses over the people you lead. Yes, you're leading them. Yes, you are their superior, but don't boss them around. Well, then how do I get them to do what I want them to do? Live as you want them to live. Set the example. Show them what this looks like in motion. Show them the way practically. Isn't that awesome? So Rehoboam, he gets the people that he grew up with, and I think this is forcing the issue. This is forcing a decision. And you know as well as I do, we're human. And sometimes it's so much more alluring or attractive to force something than to forge something. And when I say forge, I'm not talking about, fabricating your signature. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when a leader or a point person steps up and takes control in a way that establishes boundaries and sets alignment for the people they're leading and gets everyone on the same page, and everyone has a voice, and everyone's speaking in to this dynamic and speaking into this thing that we're doing, whether it's a business or a family or a local church. We're moving forward together. You're forging the way into the future. So this guy on the screen, this is my mentor I talk about, not Dr. Pruitt. This is John Samples. And John Samples used to be the executive director of the Christian Holy Land Foundation. They did a lot of great work in the Middle East, just a phenomenal guy. Well, I met him about 2 decades ago. It's been a while. It's been a minute since I met this guy. But he was one that we were donating to at my home church. We were donating to his organization. And when I arrived there, I noticed that we kept getting this receipt in the mail from the Christian Holy Land Foundation. So I'm like, I've never even heard of this guy. Let me reach out to him. So I give him a call and I'm like, hey, if you're ever in the area, stop by. You know, we're supporting your ministry. I'd love to meet you. So on a random Wednesday night Bible study, just out of the blue, the door opens and this guy walks in and he says, I'm looking for David Green. And I'm like, gosh, found out, caught. I'm like, just kidding. I'm like, okay, that has to be him. So we meet up, he stays for the Bible study, and he and I have this instant kinship. You ever met someone like that? You meet them for the first time, and you know that you're gonna be friends. You just hit it off. You've got a lot of similarities, you just click. That's how it was with us. So at the end of the Bible study, I'm like, hey, I know this is out of nowhere, but I have to make a trip tomorrow. And the trip is going to be all day long. You know, it's going to be a long time getting there. I'm going to be there for a while. It's going to be a long time getting back. We're going to leave at dawn and get back at night sometimes. So, but I really feel that you need to go with me. Are you up for it? And he thinks for a moment and he says, well, the particular area you're going to be in, I do have a connection there. And while you're tied up, I can take care of that. Yeah. And then he says, I'll pick you up 6:30 and I'll bring you home. And I'm like, okay, yeah, free trip. I like this. So let's do it. So we make the plan and we go, and it was phenomenal. The discussions that we had. And ever since that day, he has been my mentor. I officially asked him shortly after that, would he speak into my life? And he agreed. Over the years, he's spoken into some of the decisions that I've had to make. And he's a guy that I reach out to when I have an important decision to make. And some of the most important decisions that David Green has made, I've consulted with him. Not because I like him, not because I know him, but because he knows me. I keep a little email exchange between John and Michelle. I keep it close to my personal leadership devotional stuff. And the wording is simply, when I was going through that season of sickness and they thought I was going to die, Michelle reached out to John and said, I don't know what to do. David might die, and we have 3 children, and I don't know how to move forward. And one of his replies was, well, you're right. David may lose his life. So here's what we need to do next. You need people in your life who are not in your life simply because you like them, but they will tell you what you need to hear, regardless of whether you want to hear it or not. You have people in your life that will help you define reality, especially when you're thinking about how to move forward, how to make difficult decisions. You've got to get the right people around the right table. So I've relied upon John because when I call John, John doesn't just puff me up. He tells me what he thinks and what he believes, because John has been a lot of places where I find myself. He's been there before. So Rehoboam, after listening to his friends, he actually gets another group around the table. And he gets the group around the table that have actually not grown up with him, but they were part of Solomon's reign. So these are some guys who have been where Rehoboam is now. And he gets them around the table and he says, okay, here's what's going on. What's your advice? So they think for a moment and then they speak up and they say, okay, here it is, Rehoboam. It's simple. If you will be servants to these people and really serve them and give them a favorable answer, then they will be your servants for a long, long time. That's some really good advice. Making it easy for the other people who are part of this decision-making process. Really considering the benefit of everyone involved before you make a decision. You know, as we go through Proverbs, it's really interesting to me how we read about the concept of wisdom and how the right people around the right table, they're right because they have this constellation of qualities. There's this constellation of qualities that they have that add up, and wisdom wraps itself around these qualities. And psychologists echo this, and I'm not trying to go psychological on you, okay? Don't hear me saying that. Don't send me an email tomorrow that says, hey, I needed the Bible, not psychology. That's not where we're going. Wisdom throughout the book of Proverbs wraps itself around these constellation of qualities. And it seems like science and psychology are discovering just how true the biblical narrative is. So psychologists say if you were to cut wisdom open and peek inside, there's 3 vital organs that keep wisdom alive. And the first one is knowledge. You have information. Not just an intellectual, but you have knowledge. You have some information and it's pertinent. The second organ is understanding. Not only do you have this knowledge, you have a good perception of what this knowledge means. You have understanding. And the third is experience. You know what to do. You've seen this happen before. You've got an awareness of how things play out over time. That's wisdom. Those are the people that you need with you when it's time to make a really important decision, especially the experience. Because we learn not from experience, but on the reflection of experience. So Rehoboam gets this group around who have been with Solomon. They've been where he is. They've got wisdom. They've got knowledge, understanding, experience, and they know how things play out over time. Gosh, do you understand how important that quality is? I want you to get, if you get anything from this, it's that quality. People who have a feel for life. They've been where you are, so they know how things generally play out over time, and that helps their decision-making process. That's invaluable. Well, you know what Rehoboam does with this information? Verse 8 tells us he rejects it. He rejects the advice of Solomon's elders. That's why I say he drops the ball. He does something right, he takes the time out. He takes step 2, he gets it right, where he gets people around the table, but he doesn't get the right people around the right table. He rejects this. Do you know Proverbs, this is why I don't like handheld mics. So who's gonna come up here and hold this? No, I'm just kidding, nobody rush here. But I need both of my hands. Proverbs actually speaks into this. Proverbs speaks into this dynamic happening right here. And I want you to get the language. This is so important. This comes from the very first chapter of Proverbs, and it captures what's happening with this king so clearly. And I bet if you and I were honest, we could share a handful of stories of where this right here has literally played out in our lives. I bet something comes to your mind as we're walking through this. Listen to this language. Wisdom. It calls aloud in the street. I love that personification. Wisdom is calling out to you. There's something going on in your life. It's a big decision, right? Well, wisdom is calling, tapping you on the shoulder, trying to get your attention. But since you rejected me, wisdom personified, since you rejected me when I called and gave no heed when I stretched out my hand, since you ignored my advice and would not accept my rebuke, then I will laugh. I will laugh at your disaster, and I will mock you when calamity overtakes you. That's heavy language, but that's the cost and the consequence of rejecting God-given wisdom. And that's what Rehoboam does. And if you read the story, you see that it turns south and it doesn't go really well, but God steps in. And if I can be painfully practical for just a moment, your permission to do that? Okay, I've had a couple of people say, when you ask these questions, what are you going to do when someone says no? I don't know. We'll play it by ear and see in the moment, right? But this is really interesting. This story goes on and it starts going south, but there's 2 times in this story where a phrase is uttered that reminds me of how painfully practical this can be in a 21st century world, not just for ancient Israel, but for 21st century followers of Jesus like you and I. So the story goes on and there's some infighting that goes on, and it's about to turn into like a civil war. Tensions are high. Political exchanges are heated. It's a big deal. But then God sprinkles this phrase in this text a couple of times where he says, hey, don't get involved in all that. Don't go to war with each other. Don't allow this to keep going south, because this is my doing. Now, when you read that, here's the impression I get. There's a phrase that I have in my family where I say, always leading. And I love to drop that, especially when the kids were young. And you know that parental thing you can do where the kids are young, so they don't know a lot about life right now. And you can foreshadow what's going to happen, and they want something or they don't want something. You surprise them. You have just this great insight into their little small lives right now, and it rocks their world. And they're like, how did you know that? How did you do that? And I've started this phrase, always leading. And it's just stayed with us through the years. Always leading. No matter what's going on, always leading. I want you to know that your God is always leading. You've got a story here that isn't going too well, and it's not going too well with his people, but he's always leading. He's always in control, and that's why it's so important that we rely upon him for wisdom. You think about this guy Moses trying to get away from a group of people. And then this Red Sea just parts. So his decision to lead people out of Egypt coalesces with the provision of God. What kind of sense does that make? And you've got this guy named Joseph, who is supposed to start taking care of a child that isn't his. And this child's going to be the savior of the world. What sense does that make? So Joseph and his decisions coalesce with how God is working all this out. Then you got this guy we follow, Jesus, who is the most powerful man on the planet, but he's overtaken by people and they actually murder him on a cross. What sense does that make? Where decisions that we make coalesce with how God is working everything out. And not only that, you've got you and the scenario that you're up against, the scenario that's going on. Well, your decisions coalesce with how God is always leading. And he's still in control, even when it doesn't look like you think things need to look like. He's still in control of this. And a lot of it is his doing, and we don't even recognize that. Don't forget, he's always leading. Now, let me get painfully practical. I'm just going to make one statement, then I'll make the point. We are halfway through an election year. That's the statement. Halfway through an election year. Now, Rehoboam, rising to political power, makes some very controversial political moves. And it's in that context that God reminds his people that he is still in control and he is still leading, regardless of the political playout. That is a great reminder as we move forward into this year. As we move forward, we're reminded that, you know what? God is always leading. And when whoever makes political decisions that do not make sense to us in whatever regard, he's still in control. He's still leading. He's got this. So what you and I do, we align ourselves with the wisdom that he wants to make available for you and I. And what an amazing opportunity you and I have to continue to follow his son Jesus and make moves established on his word and make sure that we're moving forward with his mission and making sure that we're wrapping our lives around wisdom from above. And what a great opportunity to be the light of the world to a watching world amidst political controversy. And I have to say, as the pastor here at Madison Hills, you do a phenomenal job of that. We can't lose that as the year unfolds and as the next 4 years unfolds. Regardless, we are different. We're part of a different dynamic where wisdom leads the way to how we walk. Agreed? God, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wisdom you bring into our lives. And you know that some of us, we've got some decisions to make, and we haven't shared them with anyone or just a handful of people. Some family knows, maybe some close friends, maybe somebody in the church. But they're significant, and it's causing that anxiety. And we would give anything to be able to get around this. but we know that each passing day we've got to go through it. So we're calling on you right now to give us a shot of wisdom, Father. And if we need to take a little time out, get clear in our own heads so that we come back to the table and make a wise decision, will you let us know that that's okay? For some of us, that's a highly anxious moment to step away from a situation and think about it. Or we've never felt the freedom to do that. So will you let us know that that's okay to take a little time and think through this? And Father, for some of us, we are thinking about who we're going to tell, who we're going to share this information with. And we need you to give us insight into who the right people are, so that the right people, not just people we like, but the right people are around that table who can speak life into our life. We need wisdom for those moments. And we pray, Father, that you help us there. And as Madison Hills Christian Church, Father, we continue to rely upon the wisdom that you give from your Spirit and from your word, so that we can avoid that dynamic where in the moment, there's a way that seems so right, but in the end, it leads to death. We want to avoid that. And we want to be people who have knowledge and understanding and experience, wisdom, so that we have a feel for how things play out over time and we can walk in wisdom. God, we thank you for your son, Jesus. Always we use his name to pray and praise you. Amen.